Okay, it's 11 a.m. here in Ohio. Welcome to Indoor Ag Science Café. I'm a professor at the Ohio State University, Cherry Kubota. We are doing this monthly to share information and vision and technology and scientific research. So this is funded by USDA as a means to communicate among the professionals who are engaged in indoor farming, vertical farm. So let me go over today's agenda. Uh, Before going that, I have upcoming cafe information. Um, so today is October 26th, and then November 9th is the next one. Andrew Shearer from Farm Shelf is going to talk about his company and technology. And then December 7th is a professor at the University of Louisville talking about plant-made pharmaceutical under controlled environment. More scientific talk. And then January, we have a new series, Indoor Farming Technology Showcase. If you are interested, we still have a couple of slots for short presentation. So that's basically for you to sort of show off your technologies. No fee is involved, so it's free. You can actually nominate someone. You are interested in this technology. You want to listen to that technology provider. Just let us know, or you can self-nominate. We have 2 people sign up for now, and then I'm hoping 2 more for the first January 18th technology showcase. So let me know if you're interested. Okay, today we're gonna have Robert Colangelo from Green Sense Farms back to be our speaker. To be honest, his first one was one of my favorite. So if you haven't listened to his first one, go to OptimIA website and there is an archive page of Indoor Ag Science Café, and his one is down below because it's one of the earlier ones. So with that brief introduction, super brief introduction, Robert, I'm going to stop sharing and then have you take over the presentation, if you will.
Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Dr. Kubota, thank you for the kind words and thank you for the introduction and opportunity to present to this great group again. I'm going to talk about why vertical farms succeed and take a look 10 years in the past and 10 years in the future. So Green Sense Farms specializes in 3 things. We provide horticultural consulting. We work with entrepreneurs and help them navigate the farm startup business. We also work with investors to help them through the investment phase, due diligence, technical feasibility studies. We also do contract research for companies looking to grow indoors, and then we design and build farms. We partnered with Rufipa, a Spanish greenhouse builder. So we are agnostic to how we grow indoors, whether it's a vertical farm or a greenhouse. We look at the 4 C's. What is the crop? What is the climate? What is the capacity? And what is the capital budget? And then we'll come up with a farm design. I also founded a Green Sense radio show about 10 years ago. We've been broadcasting for that time. We focus on eco-innovations. We look at a broad range of technology out there that makes economic sense and is making the world more sustainable. So we look at everything from water and waste technology to transportation, to agriculture and food, to energy production, to the built environment. So if you know of any newsworthy, cool technologies out there, send them our way. Today, this talk is going to focus on 4 areas: farming risk, business models, capital, and indoor growing technology. And we're going to take a look 10 years in the past and 10 years in the future. My crystal ball is a little hazy, so I'm not so sure about the future, but I feel more confident in what's happened in the past. I've seen a number of presentations here and they've been excellent. They're very technically based. This is not a technical exhaustive study. This is really from my experience in vertical farming for the last 10 years. There's no pride in authorship here. If you have better data or better information or facts, please send them to me. I'm always looking to quantify this market, but it's a challenge. There's a paucity of information out there. When I look at the variability in vertical farm design and operations, it's wide. There is no one way to build a vertical farm, but there's clearly wrong ways. And so when I talk about the market here, I'm giving generalizations as I see it. And we're in a new market. If you're not failing, you're not growing. I failed many times here, but I never quit. And I give this talk to share my experience. So hopefully you won't make the mistakes I've made. You'll make new ones on your own. But I wanted to thank three people. I just gave a peer review of this presentation to make sure it was hopefully as factual as it could be. Dr. Kubota was very helpful. Lane Patterson, who's our chief engineer, and Chris Higgins also provided some input on this. When I look at the vertical farming market and how it's evolved, I would break it into three segments. The first is from 2010 to 2020, it was pretty much proof of concept. People were proving growing technologies and they were proving business models. The middle of the market is really scaling up. Those that have been successful are now trying to replicate and expand their operations. And I think it's going to take some time before we're profitable. And I think that's going to be the next phase. A lot of work was done by the scientists and the researchers that were on this call prior to 2010 to lay the foundation of this marketplace. A lot of that was led by University of Arizona and NASA. I think Dixon Despommier is analogous to Jacques Cousteau. What Jacques Cousteau did for oceans, I think Dixon did for the vertical farming market. He raised incredible amount of awareness, but he's not a practitioner. And I think a lot of the practice of vertical farming, lies on our shoulders, is taking his tall vision and grounding it in market reality. On Green Sense Radio Show, we did an interview with Dixon. So if you want to hear that, check that out. Also, Dr. Carrie Mitchell did a presentation at the Ag Science Café. There is the link that talked a lot about how this market emerged. So if you want to learn prior to 2010, take a look at that presentation. There's a lot of hype and fiction in the vertical farming market. Some of it's true, some of it is not. And if we want to grow an industry, I think it's time to ask hard, honest questions, be fact-based, and do away with a lot of the hype in the marketplace and focus on what really works. There's a lot of benefits of vertical farming. I think we should focus on those and get away from some of the hyperbole that you hear in the marketplace. I would say from 2010 to current, most of us have been building farms while we've been operating them. And that would be akin to building a plane while trying to take off, which is a recipe to crash. We are raising capital. We're trying to identify customers. We're trying to figure out what crop to go, how to package it, how to hire employees, how to perfect our growing technology, how to perfect our processes, how to reduce shrink, and how to get that package so it leaves the farm at a high quality and arrives at the customer's location at that quality. So when I looked at the marketplace, I have a sense that there's a high rate of failure here, but I couldn't find any data or facts to support that. When I looked at the greenhouse market, I see that I found one citing that said that 80% of greenhouses fail within the first 5 years. Now, I don't know if that's accurate. I couldn't find additional sightings. That seems a little high. Whether it's high or not, or accurate or not, at least there was one published fact on that. Also, when I looked at how many greenhouses there are, or the capacity, I found a US census report that showed that there was 8,750 greenhouses for vegetable farms. When I look at vertical farming, there's just very little data out there that's published and reliable. I have no idea how many vertical farms fail. I don't know how many started. I have no idea how many farms are out there. My best guess is there's about 100. If anybody has data on these markets, please share it with me. I think it would help us quantify the market. So why do vertical farms crash and burn? You know, every industry has a dark side. Even renewable energy, which I think everybody's supportive of, you find windmills crash and burns. You have problems with solar panels. It doesn't mean they're bad markets, but we need to learn from our failures. Failures is what makes us grow. And what I think the top reasons why vertical farms crash and burn is they're undercapitalized. When you're building a farm, as you're operating it, you don't know how much capital you need. So it's easy to underestimate the amount of capital. And then you run out of cash on the runway and your farm shuts down. A lot of farms have poor business models. They haven't really understood what their business is and how they get good at it. A lot of farms don't know what they don't know. So they have inexperienced management teams. They don't know who should be at the top. And it's hard to build well-rounded teams if you don't have good experienced management on the top. Many of the technologies have been unproven in the last 10 years, so they're perfecting their growing technology and their processes as they go. People underestimate the effort it takes to generate sales. We're in a new market. A big issue, which I'm going to dive down into, is refusal to pivot. People get very fixated and they don't recognize what doesn't work quickly and change quickly. It takes too much time and it burns a lot of capital. And lastly, I don't think there's a good understanding of the risks associated with vertical farming or farming in general. I grew up in Chicago. I was lucky enough I was never a basketball fan, but I was a Michael Jordan fan. And watched him win 6 championships. And I didn't know this about Michael Jordan, but he missed 9,000 shots in his career. Wow, that sounds like a failure. He lost 300 games. 26 times his teammates counted on him to make that final game-winning shot, and he missed. What he said is it was failure that made him successful. And I think that's a problem in our industry, is that failure is not worn as a badge of honor. It's looked at as a negative. And I think we got to change that. We have to recognize what's failed, learn from those mistakes, and move on. This is a tough business. If you're not able to take the hits and take the failures and get up and move on, you're not going to make it. And that's a very important part of this business and what makes farms successful. Prior to vertical farming, I worked in a very high-risk business. We would buy contaminated industrial parks, we'd clean them up and reposition them. This was fraught with a lot of risk. It was very new, and there weren't a lot of risk mitigation tools in place. So we worked very closely with the insurance industry to develop products. And the insurance industry is experts at identifying, assessing, and pricing risk. So we had lots of models for assessing risk, and I took a look at those and applied those to the farming market. So if you break risk into 4 buckets, you start with the lowest level of risk and the highest occurrence, and those are your known knowns. Those are things that happen every day. Then it gets a little more risky. It's things you know, but you don't know when they're going to happen. Then there's other things you don't know what they are, but you know they're going to happen. And then lastly, it's the things you don't know that you don't know are going to happen. And those are the highest level of risk. But luckily, as you moved from left to right, the probability of an occurrence is less as the risk increases. So let's take a look at this risk matrix and apply it to farming. So known knowns are things that happen every day at a farm. You have your production risk, and we're going to dig a little deeper into that to identify this. And this is not meant to be exhaustive. We could spend a whole day talking about farming risks and how to mitigate those. I just throw this out as an example to make sure that we see that if you want to be successful, you have to know how to identify risks, and you have to have a plan in place. You can't have a plan. You can't make a plan when a crisis happens. You have to have that plan ahead of time to be able to react successfully. Other known risks are market. What price will you get for your product? Financial risk. Can you grow a crop profitably? And lastly, policy. Is something going to change in the federal, state, or local government that will benefit or hurt your production? When we get into the known unknowns, we know equipment's going to break down. We just don't know when. We know employees are going to call in sick. We don't know when. We know that policy and legislation could change that impacts us, but we just don't know when. On the unknown known risks, we know we can grow crop, but we don't know what the quality of that crop will be. We don't know what the yield will be. And sometimes we don't know what the price of that crop is that we'll get. And lastly, the unknown unknowns are really the difficult ones to guess. The biggest example is did anybody ever think somebody would take a commercial airliner, turn it into a missile, and crash it into an iconic building in New York? Those are things that you can't think about, and it starts to stretch your imagination of the risks that could happen out there. Luckily, these are rare occurrences, but when they happen, they could be catastrophic. So you have to have a plan in place to deal with that. So when I look at production risk, it could be broken down into three main risks: operations, process, and post-harvest. So in operations, we have things like climate and weather, which are insignificant to greenhouses and vertical farms, but more of an issue outdoors. We have pests, animals, invasive species. We have irrigation issues, soil condition issues, fertilizer, and labor. So let's dig deep into production risk. So if we take a look at different types of farming, from a field farm to a greenhouse and a vertical farm, and we consider greenhouses and vertical farms CEA because they're indoors and they're controlled environments, and field farms are outdoors. And if we consider risks in high, medium, and low, we see that field farming is very risky. From pests to soil, there's lots of things you have to deal with that are hard to control in a field farm. When you come indoors in a greenhouse or a vertical farm, the risks are much lower. And the difference between a greenhouse and a vertical farm is really climate and weather. A vertical farm is totally controlled, and you have pest risks in both of those that you can mitigate. Again, when we look at a project, we look at the crop, the climate, the capacity, and the capital budget, and you could come up with a solution, whether it be a greenhouse, a vertical farm, or a combined operation. What CEA has done is it's de-risked farming. It's taken all those high risks from field farms and made those minimal, but it's created new risks. So what are the tools out there to mitigate risk? If I look on the production end, successful farms have very experienced management teams. When you have experienced people on the top, they know who to hire below them and how to build teams. They also have developed standard operating procedures, and they can train their people. It's hard to develop SOPs without knowing your process. So when you're building a farm while you're operating it, it's very hard to create those SOPs. There's lots of failures, there's lots of chaos. Lastly, they've got technology, both business technology and their growing technology perfected. They haven't built it on the runway. They've tested it, proved it before, and then started building their farm. When you look at their known unknowns, they have preventative maintenance plans. If equipment's going to break down, it'll break down a lot less if you have a regular scheduled maintenance program on your equipment, and you have contractors set up to repair that equipment in a 24-hour notice if it breaks down. You also have contingency plans for staff and employees. If someone's sick, there's a backup person. There's people that are cross-trained on jobs so that you can keep production growing. And lastly, information is power. You have lots of information. You're monitoring systems, you're monitoring policy and legislative changes, and hopefully you're anticipating things before they happen. On crop quality, one of the biggest ways to mitigate that is having enough cash flow on hand that a loss of crop is not going to stop your operation. Having contracts in place where you have fixed agreements in the future to buy your crop at a certain quality at a certain place. And sometimes you could have insurance in place, both for crop insurance and all the other risks that are associated with growing indoors. Lastly, the unknown unknowns, again, those are probably the hardest to mitigate. One way is to have insurance in place. The other way is to transfer that risk to a third party. For example, maybe you lease a building, so you're not responsible if a meteorite hits your building. That's on a third party. Or you accept the risk. You realize that it's going to happen so rarely that you're willing to self-insure on that. So I think this is the second biggest problem in our industry, is answering the question, what does vertical farming solve? When you look at business models, no matter what business you have, that circle shows you all the components that you have to have in a business model. You have to know your unit costs for production and distribution. You have to set up core values. You have to have a marketing plan. You have to have a management plan, and so on. Every business has to have that. What I want to dive into is what are the things that are specific to vertical farming. But before we go there, here's three iconic business people that have, I think, changed the world. And it's very clear they came up with a solution that solved a problem. Steve Jobs developed the iPhone. He connected the world and put information at your fingertips. That was a game changer. Elon Musk changed a 100-year-old industry that was based on fossil fuels, and he created a car with many less parts, fueled by electricity. And the auto industry said that he has made the best car ever, not just electric car, but best car ever. And then, of course, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, he changed distribution. He allowed us to get anything we want at any time we want at a very competitive price. And it was a game changer in distribution. It's very clear what these people did. So I ask again, what problem does vertical farming solve? If all the vertical farms stopped operations today, what would happen to the cost of leafy greens? For us to move on as an industry, we have to answer that question clearly, and we have to build our businesses around that. So if I look at the industry in the past and in present and the future, it's hard to really put this on a timeline, but things that are important and specific to vertical farming in a business model are, number one, the target customers. Number two, the location of where you put that farm, the crop mix, what crop are you going to grow? How big of a farm do you build? And how are you going to get your produce to the customer? So when I look at how this industry's evolved, when I look at target customers, I think a lot of people started out with institutional kitchens, going to restaurants or country clubs or local kitchens that made large-scale meals. Then they looked at produce companies because a lot of people did not have trucks. They needed some way to get that produce to the consumer. So produce companies were a good option, but they charged a very high price, sometimes 15 to 30% to distribute that produce. Also, others looked at grocery store chains, being able to deliver either to a distribution center or to individual grocery stores. And then lastly, direct to the consumer. I've not seen that so successful, but I've seen some farms sell to the companies that package meals for home cooking. The other is location. where you put your farm is critical. And I don't think we've solved this problem very well in our industry. At the beginning, people put vertical farms in inner cities, but what they found was their cost for rent was very high and their cost for labor was high. Then we saw these at industrial parks or existing structures where they would retrofit existing buildings. And now we're starting to see farms being built from custom structures. And we're starting to see them co-located with greenhouses and field farms. One of the worst advice I ever got when I started was to grow many SKUs, grow a wide variety of crop. Because the customer and grocery store wanted to reduce their SKUs and vendors. And I found that that is not good advice. It's really better to specialize in a vertical farm. When you look at most farming, especially outdoors, they specialize in melons or corn or wheat. They don't grow a very wide variety. And I think that that is something that we have to get much better at. Also, most of the farms started out with lettuce and basil and moved to baby greens and microgreens. I still think the state of the practice for vertical farming is leaf and greens. Over time, we'll be able to grow wider crops, but we're just not there yet. The other big issue is how big do you build your farm? I think that is a challenge. The way we do it is we start with a customer, figure out what crop they want and what capacity they need, and then we can start to size our farm. I think many people built it hoping that the customers would come. Then we started seeing farms go smaller to container farms. Then we started seeing farms go bigger to the mega farms. And then we started seeing in-store farms, which I call finish farms, where maybe the last few days of growing are at the store. So I think as an industry, trying to figure out what the right size of the farm is going to be critical. And then lastly, distribution. Vertical farming has the ability to change the produce industry by disrupting distribution, but we haven't done it yet. When you have a truck and you run a farm, you quickly find that that truck has to operate 40 to 45 hours a week to be profitable. And it's very difficult, I think, to do internal distribution. A lot of the deliveries need to be done to multiple locations early in the morning, requiring multiple trucks. And it's hard to keep those busy. So it's a lot cheaper, I think, and easier to outsource that to third parties, or more importantly, put your farm at your customer's location. So you cut out that whole logistics, you're able to go direct to the customer and cut out any middle people. So I think this whole distribution strategy is an evolving issue. I think the biggest problem in our industry is the capital markets. So for those of you that aren't familiar with capital, I'm going to give you a capital markets 101. This could be a 3-day presentation, so I'm going to consolidate that quickly. Capital is just like corn, wheat, or soybeans. It's a commodity, and it's graded, just like you have high quality and low quality corn. So it has two colors: equity. Equity is the amount of capital invested into a company, and it's a long-term investment. Debt is money that is borrowed by the company that will be paid back over time with interest. And the capital markets is one of the most highly stratified markets I've ever seen. There's a niche for every type of capital, and there's many different types of capital providers. If you look at the capital stack, what you see is that debt and equity is priced based on the risk. Debt is low risk capital. It's supposed to be paid back over time, and it's typically collateralized with some kind of an asset. So there's a lesser chance that the lender will not get paid. Equity typically is not secured and is high risk capital. The higher the risk, the higher the return. And the challenge with our market is a lot of these larger companies are capitalized with equity that are seeking very high returns. And I don't think we found the right capital providers for our marketplace. On GreenSense Radio Show, I interviewed Sarah Nolette, a very sharp cookie, went to MIT, has got a degree in engineering and computer sciences. She grew up in Silicon Valley, and she wrote this great article. It's called How Silicon Valley Set Ag Tech Back a Decade. And what she talks about is how there's a culture clash between the Silicon Valley investment model that looks at software and SaaS subscription agreements where a small amount of people can sit in a room for a year, develop software or an app, and then all of a sudden it can generate millions of copies of sales. When you apply that to farming, that model doesn't work. We have a long gestation period to take a idea to market to profitability. If I just look at seeds, a lot of the seed companies that are developing new seeds can take anywhere from 5 to 8 years to bring a new seed to market. All that time, it's cash in and no cash coming out. That's a big challenge in our marketplace, is finding the right capital and making sure that the cultures meld and they don't clash. And the ag market is definitely a market that takes time for things to come to market. The good news is there's a lot of money coming into the market. In my opinion, it may be the wrong money. Ag Funder, a website that monitors the market, did a recent email in September, and they showed that investment in agri-food tech hit a record this year. They raised $24 billion in the first half of the year. Of that $24 billion, $911 million was for novel farming systems, which I would put under vertical farms and greenhouses. So I think you see a lot of money coming in. My question is it the right money? To my point of how long things take to happen in the ag industry, the Chicago Tribune in 1961 wrote an article on factory farms. The article talks about the world of tomorrow, how we're going to have farms that are automated and they're timed using sensors and automation, and they didn't call it AI and robotics, but that's what they were talking about. This article was written 61, almost 60 years ago, and we're now just starting to see this technology hit the market. Bill Gates had a statement that says, we always overestimate the change that'll occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that'll occur in the next 10. I think that's very true for high technology, chips, computers, Moore's law, where things get smaller and cheaper quickly, but it's not true for agriculture. And again, I can't stress this enough. We need to find patient capital that understands the right runway, much like biotechnology that's investing in this marketplace, because I think the current investment sources are pushing a lot of wrong decisions. So if I look at the different sources of finances that fund investment in this industry, from personal to government programs to debt to equity to IPOs, and the substrata of the vehicles in which provide that financing and lay those out over time, this is the chart I've came up with. A friend of mine yesterday sent me this email that I thought was fitting. He worked for a very large nonprofit fund foundation that gave money, grants, and dollars to mission-based projects. And he said that it looks like rocky times for the indoor vertical farming industry. Aero Farms dropped their SPAC. Plenty got bailed out by SoftBank, and AppHarvest share price dropped 90% from the February high. To my point, I think a lot of these companies have the wrong capital source. So if you look at how were farms financed over time, typically a farm will have a founder that uses their savings, they tap their friends and family, their business credit cards, or maybe they'll do a crowdfunding page to raise capital for that farm. The next, I think, level is business accelerators, where you're in a venture capital boot camp that teaches you how to raise money. And at the end, sometimes they make an investment in your company. The Small Business Administration has grants and loans, and states have tax credits that all have advantages to entice investors. Banks typically don't play in the marketplace until there is cash flow to pay back loans. And so it's very hard to get bank loans for startup operations. It's much easier to get those loans when a business is ongoing and it has cash flow and it has collateral to pay back that debt. But there are some state and local programs that provide startup loans. And there's institutional debt out there. There's high-risk debt that's priced 10 to 18% a return to fund startups. And then lastly, it's equity. And there's a whole stratification of equity investors. And then there's IPOs, initial public offerings. And we've started to see some of that in the marketplace. SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, or blank check companies, are something that's been around for a while. It's had a bit of a tainted reputation, but it's something that's starting to emerge. And this is what AeroFarms was looking at. Blank check companies are companies where you have a well-known investor that can raise a blind pool of capital that goes into a startup company, so that it's a very clean company, and they take it public so they could do it very quickly, because it's a shell company with no history, and it's very easy to go through the IPO process. And then it has 24 months to place that capital in companies. And that's what a SPAC is. And that's why it has a bit of a tainted reputation, because the investors don't know where that money will be placed. So keep your eye on there. And again, the capital markets is very stratified. It's purposefully obtuse and hard to navigate, but we need to find the right capital source to make vertical farms successful. So when I look at vertical farm technology, there's a theory out there, punctuated equilibrium. It's how life may have evolved. Rather than a linear evolution, we have these episodic events that occur, and you get a proliferation of life or a species. I sort of see that happening in technology, is that it's not a linear curve. When we first started and built our first farm in 2010, there was no supply chain. We had to develop everything. There was very little out there. But now, this is a very exciting time to be in vertical farming. There is a proliferation of technology out there. I think we're going to go through a bit of a lull, and then we're going to have another peak of technology. And I see this the way technology evolves in the marketplace rather than this linear progression. So I'd be interested to hear anybody's thoughts or ideas on that. So where do I see the future of vertical farming? The first area is I see vertical farming start to specialize. It's going to start to mimic and replicate the greenhouse industry. You're going to have people that manufacture equipment. You'll have people that design and build farms, and then you'll have people that only operate farms. We have to get better business models. Farms have to operate profitably, else we're not going to be able to get capital to start these farms, and the industry won't move forward. Farms have to get cheaper to build and operate, and they have to be much more energy efficient. I see AI, automation, conveyance technology slowly coming into the marketplace. I think we're still 5 to 7 years away before that becomes cost effective and reliable and robust, but it's coming, and we have to keep our eye on it. One of the biggest areas I think we have to improve is the sustainability of HVAC and climate control system. We have to think out of the box, not use standard AC and dehumidification equipment, and look at systems that can use the outside climate where it's feasible. Also, water treatment. We always make a claim of recirculating our water, Being able to filter that water for pathogens and treat it so it can be reused longer and longer will be important. And I think one of the biggest areas that we're starting to see a lot of investment and technology developed is in seed genetics. Being able to breed seeds that grow in indoor climates under LED lights will allow us to grow a much wider crop at much more cost-effective ways. An area that really is lagging behind that we have to work on is post-harvest and food safety protocol. A lot of vertical farms can grow crops very well. They look great in the farm, but by the time they get to the store, they don't look great. Being able to package those, harvest those, and get them to the store at a high quality with long shelf life is an area we have to be working on. And then lastly, I see the stool with three legs. Government, academia, and business have to form partnerships and work much closer together to advance this marketplace. So in closing, why do vertical farms succeed? They know how much capital they need, and they raise that much capital. They understand who their customers are, and they have a value proposition for their customers, and they build their business model around that. They have experienced management teams. They understand production, they understand growing, and they understand business and the produce business. They have technology that's proven. They know what crop to grow. Their farms are designed to grow that crop effectively. They understand that this business is all about density and being able to grow the highest amount of biomass in the shortest amount of time at the highest quality. They understand their unit production costs per crop. They understand how to reduce shrink. This is a big problem in our industry that's not talked about, is that shrink proliferates from seeding to harvest and every point in between. And the difference between profitability and not is being able to control that shrink all along the process. And lastly, they have a risk mitigation plan in place. They understand the risks and they've got a plan for solving them. But more importantly, they are not afraid to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and be fast to pivot once they've made one of those. So again, I thank Dr. Kubota and her team for all the work they do. I think these are great presentations. It's a great way to meet the industry in an open forum to exchange information and share ideas. And I'm happy to answer any questions.